We set up trusts to take care of our beneficiaries. This could be a potentially fraught relationship because money's involved. What can you do? What can a trustee do? What can a beneficiary do to avoid problems? Hi, I'm John Strohmeyer with Strohmeyer Law, where we help our clients leave no unfinished business. While I am a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, so don't take the advice you hear from some talking head on the internet without a grain of salt. Make sure you talk to your own advisors about what works for you and your situation. I also want to mention that our firm does offer a free 5-day estate planning challenge. It's an email course. It'll help put you on the road to no unfinished business. Make sure you hit the link in the bio for that. Finally, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, if you set up a trust, you're putting somebody in a fiduciary position. They're going to be a fiduciary with respect to assets to the beneficiaries who are going to get the benefit of it. This will also apply in probate, where a personal representative, an executor, or an administrator will be responsible for owning and managing assets for the benefit of someone else. So I'm going to talk about it in the context of a trustee and a beneficiary, but know that it also applies in probate. A lot of these same concepts just apply across the board whenever there's a fiduciary relationship. So why does this come up? Where does this come up? Again, we're putting somebody in charge who owns assets for the benefit of somebody else. For whatever reason, we've decided that it's going to be better for one person to own things and somebody else to get the benefit of it. The big problem is going to be that beneficiary wants those assets, wants to know more about those assets, and the trustee may not have given as much, may not be making distributions. And so we're looking to keep the relationship as harmonious as possible. Again, it'll come up in two contexts. One, once the trust has been set up, or in probate, once the estate administration has begun, we have somebody who's responsible for managing these assets for somebody else. When we think about it during the planning process, though, we're thinking about what's going to happen when we set up this relationship. How can we think down the line? How can we look and say, well, I'm not going to be here. Uncle Joe is going to own these assets for the benefit of nephew Stephen. Could something go wrong? And it is possible that things could go wrong. Obviously, anything could always go wrong. We want to think through, well, is this a good relationship? Is this the sort of thing we want to set up? What sort of assets are going to be in there? Is Uncle Joe really the right person to own these? Thinking about nephew Stephen, is there ever going to come a time when Stephen should be in charge of his own assets? So thinking through that, kind of thinking through as part of the planning process, let's make sure we've set up the right relationship. Here are the things, though, as a trustee. What should the trustee be doing to minimize friction with the beneficiaries? Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure there's good open communication with the beneficiary. As the trustee, remember that the assets don't belong to you for your own benefit. This is not money. These are not assets you could take and put in your pocket and then go spend on beer and Maseratis and Fabergé eggs if that's what you wanted to do. As the trustee, you're responsible for making sure that they are invested correctly and distributed appropriately to that beneficiary. So making sure you know what your job is and also communicating clearly what your job is to the beneficiary. In some cases, yes, you'll have required distributions that need to be made. Now, make sure you make those. If there's more discretion given to you, if it's an open-ended standard that says whenever you think it's appropriate to make a distribution, make that distribution, or if you've got the discretion, make sure that you're communicating clearly with the beneficiary. This is why I'm taking this discretion. This is why I'm exercising my rights here to say, right now, we don't want to make this distribution because X, Y, Z. Make sure that the beneficiary knows, and also that you've documented why you're making this distribution. If if the beneficiary is asking for $100,000 and there's only $110,000 left in the trust and it needs to stretch out for a few more years, well, we don't have enough money to set this up, may be a good enough reason. Another item to consider as part of your communication plan is letting the beneficiary know what has happened inside the trust. Not just the money that's come out to them, but everything that's come in or gone out of the trust while you've been the trustee. This is typically called an accounting and is something different than tax returns or an inventory. Inventories typically are a static look at exactly what is on the balance sheet for that trust and the trustee at any given time. Tax returns obviously reflect income and taxes due based on that income for a set time. Again, usually the calendar year. An accounting, though, is something different. An accounting is meant to show what the fiduciary has received and spent money on over a given time period. So it's not a snapshot, but rather a look at everything that's come in and gone out over that certain time period. Now, a fiduciary, even if they've only served for a portion of the trust, will need to be able to show what has happened over the entire course of the trust. So if we imagine a trust that got created for nephew Stephen with Uncle Joe as the trustee when Father Fred passed away, well, Uncle Joe as trustee is going to be responsible for all the assets that come in or go out from the moment that Fred passed away and the trust gets set up until the current time. Stephen has the right to say, as the beneficiary, what's going on inside the trust. Even if you're not distributing all those assets, Stephen has a right to know, well, copy of the trust agreement governing how Uncle Joe is managing the trust, but also what assets went into the trust initially, what has been spent either in distributions, compliance costs, fees for investments, fees for Uncle Joe as the trustee. And so this accounting needs to balance. Everything that's come in needs to balance with the assets that are left inside the trust, as well as what has gone out for expenses and distributions. Part of that accounting will also include saying, when assets come in, was this a principal asset of the trust, or is it income as a return on an investment? Assets that go in, if it's real estate, that's generally going to be principal, though rent received from that rental property, that would be income. Distinguishing between principal and income as part of dealing with the trust will also be something that's the job of the trustee to make sure that the assets are categorized effectively. Finally, when you're drafting trust agreements, you want to make sure that the trustees know what their obligations are. So making sure that you're thinking about, well, should accountings be done on a more regular basis? A lot of times they're not required on any particular cadence or time period, but every year as you're doing the trust tax returns, it's probably a good idea to go back and look over, hey, this is a good time for an accounting anyway. And also making sure that the beneficiary knows, if you don't like this, if you have questions, make sure that we've got the open communication to keep everything going. On the flip side, what should beneficiaries be doing? Well, as the beneficiary, you're entitled to know what's going on inside your trust. So asking questions, making sure that you've got a copy of the trust agreement, a good list of the assets, as well as has there been a recent accounting? There may be reasons the trustee isn't making a distribution. They should be able to explain that to you pretty effectively. And just making sure that they know that you, as the beneficiary, are interested and are paying attention. These are generally questions that the trustee should be able to answer for you. Now, it also doesn't give you insight into everything that goes on in the trust. You want to make sure that you are working with the trustee and not in such a way that's going to sour the relationship. Not every trust agreement gives the beneficiary the right to choose or change a trustee. So considering that the people who are in charge may have been picked for a particular reason, thinking about it that way, thinking about, well, if you're maybe stuck with Uncle Joe as the trustee, you're going to want to have a good working relationship. But even in the case of a relationship that may not be at its best, you're still going to want to avoid costly fight if you can. These fights aren't cheap, and a lot of times they can cost easily 10% of the assets of the trust if somebody really wants to fight about it. Because fights can get expensive, you're going to want to avoid having them between the trustee and the beneficiary. So to the extent that you can get the answers out easily and quickly from the trustee, that's just going to make life better for everyone. We talk about our 4 horsemen of the estate planning apocalypse, and a fight like this not only involves that fighting horseman, but it can bring in 2 others, losing assets and additional costs, if only because we're spending time and effort on this fight, but also thinking about our last one, delays and frustration. Having this fight isn't great for anybody. You're delaying when you can get assets, you're delaying and frustrating the purpose of the trust potentially by fighting between the trustee and the beneficiary. So as we think about all of this, we try and bring it all together. Remember, open lines of communication, making sure that everybody knows what's happening and what's going on, will do the best to solve problems between the trustee and the beneficiary. If that's not going to work, an accounting to get a good idea of what's going on inside the trust will be the next step. Litigation may be there, but if you've got a way to swap a trustee for somebody who may be a better fit between the beneficiary, might be an option. Thanks so much for watching. If you've got other questions about this, go ahead and leave a question in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.